G'day, I'm Tim Thompson. Today is a quick little video and it's a bit of Q&A. I've got the most popular questions that I've been asked for the last 12 months about my tiny vineyard, getting it going and getting all the vines established. Hope you enjoy. So let's deal with the pruning related questions first. One viewer has asked me, why do I trim my canes short? Why not just fill up the wire with all of the growth from last year? Well, it's a good question, and it basically comes down to vine capacity. What you see up the top is what you see down below. We want a really active and healthy root system to push new growth in this plant and grow 4 to 5 foot long canes for us with 1 to 2 bunches of fruit per cane. Now that's not going to happen if we leave all of last year's growth on the vine. Particularly when I'm establishing the young vines, I don't want to get too greedy too quick. I want to keep my cordons or my arms nice and short, and what that's going to do is it's going to force the vine to produce lots of nice shoots down here in the crown, which give me plenty of options for setting up my vine next year when it's going to be even healthier, stronger and more fruitful. Now of course you're not going to get every single grapevine right, and here's a perfect example of one I've stuffed up. You see, last year this trunk would have been a lot thinner, but I had 2 beautiful canes in exactly the right spot, so I've gone and wrapped them down, and I've probably wrapped them down a little bit too far along the cordon. So have a look at what's happened. All of the growth has gone to apical dominance. We've produced some lovely shoots up here, but we've got nothing down in the crown. All we've got is these tiny little shoots here that I can preserve because they've got buds on them. I might get some growth out of them, but I'm going to have to restrict the growth of this grapevine this year to try and produce some more growth around this cane that I can use next year to rehabilitate my vine. So here's what I'm going to do. Instead of wrapping down these canes and continuing the apical dominance, I'm going to spur off a couple of these with the spurs about a hand span apart, and that's going to restrict the growth on this grapevine and allow me to focus attention and resources back into the crown. I'm going to take off the very ends, and I'm not going to allow it to produce too many shoots up high, and so I should get something down in here for next year, and I can return to my cane pruning. The reason why I cane prune is because it produces more fruit off a smaller area. It actually reduces the number of cuts per vine, so it lowers your disease pressure from pruning, and it allows you to rehabilitate your vines year on year and keep your structure perfect. And it also means that you're not producing lots of shoots and bunches in one small area. You're spreading the shoots and bunches out, so it lowers your disease pressure and it evens up your fruiting, meaning that the quality of your fruit is higher. People spur prune because it's cheaper and easier, and you can pretty much teach anyone to cut spurs at a handspan distance, but it takes a little bit more practice and skill to do cane pruning. So when you're starting out and when you're first establishing a vineyard, keep your cordon short for the first couple of years and produce a nice, healthy, easy to manage crown down at least a handspan below your cordon wire. Here's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. You can see that this trunk is quite a bit skinnier. That would indicate to me that the root system's not fully established on this vine. Not only that, but I also had really fine shoots that were under pencil thickness, which meant that I didn't have enough capacity in those shoots to transport the sap and create the growth potential for a good amount of new shoots on the cordon. So what I've done instead is I've made this shoot very short, and I've brought all of the energy focus back down to the crown. You want to have your crown a handspan below the wire, because when you bend your canes each year, when you prune them, you don't want them to snap as you're putting them on the wire. If your crown's too high, pruning becomes an absolute nightmare. So when you're deciding how much to leave on the cordon, always be a little bit cautious and underdo it rather than overdo it. Now that brings me to the next question, which is why not just tie one cane down to the next vine rather than tying 2 canes down? Surely that would be quicker. And the answer is yes, it is. And in fact, some vineyards do use that technique, although it's quite rare. The reason why it's rare is because of the vines themselves and how they work. There's this thing called apical dominance. The longer this shoot goes, the more likely you are to have strong shoots at the end and strong shoots here and nothing in the middle. This is because of a hormone called auxin that's produced at growing shoot tips. Now, grapevines are designed to climb up trees. So they don't want stuff growing down low, they want all their energy to be concentrated up high. That means that they produce a lot of auxin at the shoot tip, and that restricts growth in the middle of the cordon. So you don't want that happening, because that's going to lower your fruiting potential, it's going to crowd your crown, and it's going to crowd your ends, and you're going to end up with uneven, half-ripe fruit. So to avoid that, we keep both of the canes short by splitting the vine in half and running it in both directions. Yes, it takes a bit more time, but you get better fruit generally. There's another advantage to running 2 canes instead of 1 as well, and that is your trunk and vine structure over time. If you're constantly leaning the vine in one direction, eventually your trunk will bow and twist and become hard to manage, catch on tractors as you drive past, all that sort of thing. If you have 2 canes wrapped up to different sides of the wire in different directions for each vine, it keeps the trunk nice and straight and upright, makes your vineyard last longer, and makes it a lot easier to manage. For the next question, we're coming down to where the vines have been stunted a bit by the trees. And that question is, how do you turn a straight vine? Remember, in the first year I grew these straight up a string to the top wire. How do you turn a straight vine into a split trunk? Well, it's actually quite easy. What you do is you have your fruiting or cordon wire here, you come down a handspan and you leave all of the buds growing below that handspan, so they push out a crown for you in the following year. The next question was around timing. What's the best time of year to prune your young vineyard? Well, the answer depends on how much time and labour you have available to you. You always prune in winter time when the vines have lost their leaves and drawn back all the nutrients from their shoots to the trunk and to the roots. But you also want to prune when you're less likely to get disease. So the ideal answer is as late as possible. You want to actually prune when you start to get a little bit of sap flow, so that you've got positive sap pressure in the vine, and when you make a cut, it pushes any pathogens out of the vine. Now, that's not always practical in commercial vineyard settings, so what you then tend to do is you tend to prune the earlier bud bursting varieties like this Nebbiolo here first, and you leave the later bud bursting varieties like Cabernet and other varieties like that till last. So the next question is, how do I select shoots out of this vine? Well, it's actually quite easy. Just use the handspan rule. You want to come handspan down, that's where you want your trunk. So I'm going to be looking for 2 strong shoots that are pencil thick, that are coming out of the trunk area down here. And I'm also going to be wanting to keep those shoots reasonably small, because I still don't have the trunk structure to push lots and lots of foliage without sacrificing a good crown for the following year. So let's have a look at this grapevine. We want 2 fresh canes. So we've got a fresh cane here, 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 and here. The only 2 that follow the handspan rule that are off the same single trunk are these 2, so it makes my choice really, really easy for me. That's going to be my crown for this year, and I'm going to leave a spur down here so that I hopefully get some more growth a little bit below it, because it is still just a little bit high for my liking, and that's going to establish me a nice strong crown. All I have to do now is cut away the rest of the stuff I don't need, trim these 2 canes to a reasonable length, and wrap them down. When I wrap them down, I'm going to alternate them. So I'm going to have this shoot on this side of the wire and this shoot on this side of the wire, wrapping them in opposite directions, and that'll keep my trunk nice and straight. Oh, and it was very naughty of me to not point out, always wear your speed dealers when you're pruning, because if you get flicked in the eye with a cane, it hurts a lot and you can pop an eyeball. So you wear some protection. So I've got my cable ties ready in my mouth, and I'm not going to be too greedy. I'm going to keep my cordons nice and short and produce good structure in the first couple of years. Oh, always cut through your end bud as well, leaving a bit of a knob. That way the cable tie doesn't fall off, and you're not tying a cable tie in front of a growing bud, because it'll strangle it. You see, I'm keeping these quite short. So in short, don't be afraid to make hard decisions, particularly when you're first starting out setting up the vineyard. Your main emphasis always has to be structure. What are you going to have to prune with next year? The next thing is the irrigation system. I've been asked a couple of questions about that. So setup of the irrigation system, there's a few things that you should really consider doing. The first is, don't put your main at the end of the rows and come straight off your main into the irrigation system. Put your main inside the vineyard where it's not going to be damaged by traffic on the outside, where you're going to be able to have a T come up and join into your irrigation line, because that allows you to tension your irrigation line at both ends and it won't sag like it does if you have a loose fitting coming into your irrigation line at that end. Now for the irrigation tube, I'm using 13mm pre-inserted pressure compensating dripper line. It's got a dripper about every 300mm, which is way closer than the vines are spaced. And what I've done is I've put a little clip keeping the irrigation line onto the wire at each vine. So it means if the water runs down the irrigation pipe after it comes out the emitter, it hits the clip and falls off directly on the grapevine. So I'm getting maximum benefit for that. People wonder why you would bother having drippers halfway along. Well, think about the root system. You want it to grow out. You don't want it to stay concentrated around the plant, so you want your drip system to encourage that feed out. I'm on a slight slope, so I'm definitely using pressure compensating drippers because I don't want to deliver more water at the end of the vineyard than I do at the top. I want a nice, even and consistent application so I can plan my irrigations better. Now, people have asked me about fertilising the vineyard, and I'm trying to stay as organic as I can within reason. The vine leaves indicated to me last year that I was still, despite putting some natural super on, I'm still slightly short of phosphorus, so I'll be topping up the phosphorus soon out of my spreader. But I'm relying on these little girls quite a bit. We've got our chooks here and they go up and down each row each week. They go down one row per week. They're getting a bit of curry at the moment from the local magpie. He's swooping the cage a lot. But up until now, they've been perfectly happy all year, giving me a consistent supply of eggs, keeping the grass down and putting plenty of fertiliser into the ground. Uneaten seeds also creating a little bit of biodiversity in the floor of the vineyard. I've also been grazing my small baby doll sheep in the vineyard during winter because that was the original plan for getting them, was as a natural herbicide, a natural fertiliser and a natural slasher. But my tip would be hold off a couple of years because they've given the young vines a bit of curry and we've had some replants as a result. So probably don't get sheep in your vineyard until maybe the 3rd to 5th year when you got nice solid trunks. And trust me, even though the baby doll sheep are small, they'll still stand up on their hind legs for a bit of leaf material. So keep them out of the vineyard whenever there's leaf on. So hopefully that answers some of the questions. In the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be removing any cane material after pruning from the vineyard because that's a source of infection material. And I'm going to be having a look at some undervine weed treatment that could be interesting, and I'll be making a video on that soon. Don't forget guys, hit the little subscribe button, give it a thumbs up, and if you like this sort of content, there's plenty more on timthompson.ag. Let me know in the comments if I answered your questions.